Alright, so for mounting the rails themselves.
Mounting the rails on the table, I'll provide these pedestals. You can see them under there. It's a 1x2 square tubing, a rectangle tubing, and I machine a 3/8 slot in the top of one of them, on one end. So, I haven't done it yet. Forgot about those. So basically you have this 1x2 tubing, and it's hollow in there, and you machine a slot, 3/8 slot, because that's the size hardware, right? So that's what you end up with. Then you take your hardware that I'm providing. I got y'all some nice hardware too. So you do it. Complement the black.
Only the best.
So I've got you socket cap screws. Take a washer and you drop it in. This will slide right in there.
Okay.
So you won't have to use a wrench. Put this through your plate, tighten that up, and then you just tighten them down, and that'll hold it in place. And then you got a little bit of adjustment here for your width and your and to straighten them up.
Okay.
So
you're saying for laying them down to get them square, we take one of these, whichever one appears the straightest.
Yep.
You're going to bolt it down.
Which they're all, I mean, they're both really straight already.
And then you're going to take the second one.
You take the first one and you bolt it down and you run a string down the edge. You want to use the edge that your plate's going to ride on, that your gantry side's going to ride on. And once you have that straight, you know, you might have to push and pull on it a little bit with your hand, and you tighten those bolts down as you go. I put y'all's bolts a little closer together so you have more.
Okay.
It's a little, I put those too far apart. I think that like I had that much hardware or something, so that's how I built it. Once you got that one straight, so I did that back side, I just loosely mounted this plate, this rail, and I slid the gantry on. Okay?
Okay.
And then I measured from outside edge to outside edge, everywhere there's a bolt, and I made sure I had the exact same measure, not one side or the other of a line. It was exact center of the line with a tape measure. And you pull the same amount of pressure every time. And I did it by myself. It was real easy. And I made this one exactly parallel with that one.
Okay.
Now, when I welded these, and this is why I do this, when you weld this inside corner, this is going to pull in a little bit. So this plate isn't perfectly straight, which is what you want, because as those plates are in, when you slide it on, you're going to straighten them out, and it's going to keep like spring pressure on those, so that it really locks it down and keeps it tight.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So it works. I mean, it works out for you. You could keep this straight. You could clamp something to it, which I do. I clamp a piece of angle right here to minimize it, because you don't want a lot, but you want some. You can see here, it just barely got maybe a 1/16 of an inch here. It's a little bitty gap.
Yeah.
So when I pull the clamps off, that's all it moved on me. Which is, you know, that's how that one's done too. This one has this in here because I thought I needed it, but I don't. Because I had a drive issue when I first set up the table, and it was getting out of square, and I had some motors set wrong, like by a decimal point. So it would cut and it would get out of square, and I thought, man, it's moving somehow, but this doesn't do anything. The motors are moving the same. This thing is moving the same, no matter what. So when you set it up, what you want is some switches like this on the ends. And what you do is you take your table and you draw a square with it. You draw a rectangle with it. You jog it. You know, so this would be negative X. You jog it negative X, and then you jog it positive Y. And you measure that angle, and you want to make sure it's square. And if it's not, you can square your gantry by moving these switches in and out. And so as it goes, it'll hit those switches, and then the switches will close. They're normally open, and then it'll bounce off. And as soon as they close again, or as soon as they open, the table will stop. So that's how you square your table, by adjusting those switches. And then those motors, they'll lock it down right there, and they hold it there. So you reference the X, and it squares up the table, and then you're always cutting nice square angles. And you can adjust it, you know, if you didn't want to cut something square for some reason. So, I mean, obviously it has a limit. It's not going to get way out of square, because it'll bind up. But that's how you square it and keep it perfectly square. And you can always run it down there and reference the X axis, and it'll go click. And if it goes click, click, you know it was out of square. But mine always goes click. Now that I've got my little tuning issue fixed.
Nice.
So, sweet. Also, what helps this belt reduction, if you had a direct drive, like I can barely move this. I mean, it's hard to move. And I can get the table out of square there. And so, if I move it and it's out of square, when I click it, when I send it and reference it, which I'll do that for you, so that you can see, we have a power outage, that big storm. Get everything to spool up. Reset. Page up. That's how I jog it with the keyboard. So it'll roll, and it sounds kind of nasty right now because it's so out of square. But I can click reference X. It'll go down there all on its own, and it'll hit those two switches. And since I've pushed it out of square, I'm not going to click at the same time. And right now it's moving at 150 inches per minute. I mean, that's not fast, but you're very rarely going to cut something that fast. Maybe some 1/8 inch with a big plasma gun. But I take that back. I cut it 230 inches a minute. Now you see how they hit different?
Yeah.
Now I can run it over here, reference it again, and it's square.
Exactly.
So, and that's what you want to do. You want to get it perfectly square where it's squaring, and then you want to scribe some lines on here with a scribe. So you put the face of the switch there. And I don't got any more in there.
Looks good.
Pretty easy deal. And you can reference Y too. There's no way the Y can get out of square. I gotta clean this fucker, man. I'll never give it a chance. And you set another switch here. Boom. That's where your Y is home. So, which y'all have a big giant table. I mean, this one's kind of big. Y'all already have a big one. Which is great because you could have some 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch, 3/8, some 1/8 inch, and make all your stuff. And you don't have to switch a bunch of material all the time. You just run over to my little piece of 1/8 inch, to my piece of 1/2 inch, kind of like I had set up there. So
Be good for cutting tractor parts.
yeah, and you can set tube on there, cut tube, angle, all sorts of stuff. Just gotta, I mean, limits of your imagination. Like I've taken. Say I need a series of holes down this angle. The best way to do it isn't to lay it down like this, because then your plasma cutter would hit that leg. So with your table, what you do is you stand it up like this, right? And you can bring your. And actually, that's kind of a lazy way. I'll show you how I actually did that. I had to do that. I had to cut a series of holes into my 8-foot pieces in that angle. I've got them all. I'm using them little short pieces. But you take another piece of angle and you set it right in here. Another handy thing, when you put these rails on, the first one you put on, make sure it's perfectly square with the limit of your table. That way, when you do stuff like this, I slide this up here and I tack weld it there.
Mm-hmm.
Then I use a clamp to hold that. And really, you only need like one on that end and one on this end if you're doing long pieces.
Uh-huh.
So you would make sure you had it, you know, on the end where you could clamp it right there. Then you can run down here and cut whatever you wanted out of that, just like it was a piece of plate. And you take it out, and you got your bolt holes all in there. Do the same thing with square tube. So,
Awesome.
if you needed to do a big piece, you can take your slats out, set it down on the floor, set it down on the bed.
Oh, yeah.
It's really, I mean, it's really whatever you want it to be. I put these slats at a curve so that they don't rock, so that they don't teeter.
Uh-huh. Makes sense.
I mean, it's just no limit to what you can do with that table. You can draw with it. You can put a router on it. You can do anything.
Save the world with it, Ben. The world.
Save the world, one village at a time.
That's right.
One village starter kit at a time.
Cool. Thank you, Ben.